Hey everyone, it's me HawkeyeG, and today I'm doing another campaign starter guide. Today's guide's for the Last Defenders faction of the Lizardmen, and we're looking at the Mortal Empires campaign. The Last Defenders, of course, are the other base game faction for the Lizardmen. They really haven't seen many advancements since release either, and they've gained a lot of new enemies over time. They're a well-rounded faction with some focus on the Lizardmen's best strengths, so you can just do what works, or you can experiment a little if you like. This campaign is definitely more challenging with all the new characters added and the new mechanics and the rework of some of the old world systems. Yeah, it's a tough one. This one's definitely tougher than it looks. You've got what seems to be a safe start, but you have so many obstacles to overcome, right? The Southeast is tough for anyone without an underway stance, right? So in this guide, we'll be giving a quick overview of their campaign, talking briefly about military and building considerations, giving some short-term goals and how to execute them, and then providing a long-term strategy for how to finish the campaign successfully. Now, if you are enjoying these videos, please remember to like and subscribe, as it does help the channel out and it keeps you up to date on the content. Plus, of course, I appreciate it. With that being said, let's get into the video. So, of course, to start the overview, we're just jumping in on turn 1 and looking at our start position. Right, we start out in the actual literal corner of the map here, right? If you're familiar with this general location of the map, you know that Skaven, the Clan Moors, are going to be our first big obstacle here. So our short-term goals are to eliminate the Skaven here, as well as the Tomb Kings up here, or at least take their starting provinces. We need to try and get a hold of territory and move on them fairly early if it's possible. Otherwise, we'll end up on the defensive for a while. But that's okay too if that happens. It's just a very real possibility that we may have to expect and should probably plan for. Moving ahead a little further, with any luck we'll have our short-term goals achieved. We may not have fully eliminated the factions we wanted to, but we have at least taken their starting provinces like we wanted, right? And it means that we have control over our enemies and a solid and defensible terrain and control. We might have some setbacks that I'll discuss in detail later. We might also get lucky with some things and be able to push on through without, something like this happening. Basically, we just want to ensure the Skaven are no longer a legitimate threat and that the Tomb King's 9-slot capital belongs to us. Now, again, if you're familiar with this terrain, the next problem is figuring out what to do with the Greenskins and how to navigate towards a victory. If everything goes well and our long-term strategy is relatively successful, we'll be able to expand a little bit further. Taking out the Greenskins is, of course, difficult and will probably require cooperation with the Dwarves. There's a couple ways to go about it, which, of course, I'll discuss in detail later on. But a lot of this campaign is just making sure that your position is stable, right? Making sure that you have things built up and secured, trying to get your economy to a manageable point, making sure that you have the right kind of army composition and the right, number of troops in your armies, that you don't overextend and take too much territory that you can't manage, right? Another part of it is just being able to hold out, right? The Greenskins are dangerous, but if you win enough fights against them and they can't put together a WOG, their momentum dies off pretty quickly and you can overcome them at that point, right? So when the threat of the Greenskins is finally reduced, you can get back to focusing on victory conditions and should be able to put together a win pretty easily at this point. Now, having talked about and given a little overview, let's jump into the middle of a campaign and talk about some of the building and military considerations we'll make here. The first thing we'll talk about here is the buildings, but we're going to spend a decent amount of time talking about the military section. In particular, there's going to be a good amount of time spent discussing how to deal with the Greenskins. They're the most significant threat to this campaign, and since you're going to be like a lesser faction going up against a primary faction, it's going to be a challenging time. So just want to warn you of that. We've got a long road ahead of us, but we're talking about buildings, right? If we look at our starting province, we don't really have a lot of special landmark buildings. There are a lot of resource buildings, though. And if we go over a little ways, there is the Golden Tower, which is a landmark building. However, this can kind of be a trap if you go for this too early before you're ready to press and hold against the Skaven, right? We also have a 7-slot capital, and we're the Lizardmen, which means we have all these different, secondary buildings that we want to try to fit in someplace if we can as well. This means that you're probably going to have to put like a military building in one of your minor settlements early on in order to give yourself like a proper mid-game military advantage, right? Now, as for army compositions, I think there's a couple of options here, right? The first I'd consider is what I basically consider the new main path, the default path for Lizardmen after all their little reworks and additions, right? You probably get Saurus to start. If you're on Legendary, maybe you're just going more into Skinks and just getting a bunch of Skink cohort with Javelins to hold the line early on. The second thing you get is the Pterodon Riders with Fire Leech Bolas. They're easy to get at a low level and extremely effective at this point in time. And then later on you transition into Beasts with whatever kind of either flying units or missile units that you want to use in order to support your Beast units and try to offset the cost of them, right? So that's one option, right? Skink Cohort and Saurus to start. You can do more Saurus because we're Krok Gar here and they're cheaper. You add in Pterodons when you get them. Fire Leech Bolas are very good, and regular Pterodons are pretty versatile. Then later on, you go into Beasts. Again, Krok Gar himself has a little bit of specialization, and they're just one of the stronger tools for the Lizardmen, right? So you get the upkeep reduction to Saurus Warriors and the armor bonus for Pterodons and Beast units, as Krok Gar specifically. Now, an alternate composition to consider here is the Cold One Riders. I know, nobody likes them. Cavalry sucks in Warhammer 2, so on and so forth. But they are a good solution. And again, Cold One Riders are something that Krok Gar gets a 50% upkeep reduction on, right? The Last Defender is upkeep for Saurus and Cold One units. So it is possible to take these just because they're going to be a lot cheaper, right? 125 puts them at just above the cost of a typical Skink cohort, right? Now, the reason you would take Cavalry is as a counter to the Skaven, right? It's great to have them in the early to mid game against the Skaven, and there's no doubt you'll be fighting them. It's just the right unit to counter their Gutter Runners and Night Runners, and generally just effective on flanks as a whole. It's also going to help you, if they're taking something more like Warp Fire Throwers or Rattling Guns, or in general, whatever ranged units they have, you're not going to have a good time running them down with Saurus or Skinks. You are going to have a good time running them down with Cold One Spear Riders, right? So I know it's not a perfect unit. It underperforms relative to the rest of the roster. There's still a niche for it to fill early in the campaign, so I want to at least put it out there and consider it, right? Past that, I'd say just go with standard Lizardmen into the late game, but with the 10% faction-wide bonus that you get as Krok Gar and the Last Defenders, you really can kind of experiment a little bit with whatever you want as well. In the sense, not specializing in anything as a faction means that you can try whatever you want as a faction and just kind of take advantage of that upkeep reduction bonus faction-wide, right? Alright, so I said I wanted to talk about the greenskins specifically and how to deal with them as the Lizardmen. Okay, one of the issues you'll face is the Arachnarok Spiders and Giants. In general, they're large units. This kind of includes their cavalry. Best way to deal with that is the Carnosaur and the Troglodon. Okay, that one's pretty simple. Their cavalry, we're going to have to kind of come back to that because it's more important to figure out how to deal with the Black Orcs, okay? Their infantry is just going to be really powerful, and that's going to shred units like Feral Carnosaurs and Troglodons. So what are our possible solutions? We have the Stegodon. Okay, this has good range, good armor-piercing missile strength, and it actually has anti-infantry, plus it's comparable price, right? Black Orcs have 300 upkeep. Stegodon is a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely going to do a lot of damage on their way in, and should be able to win, or at least hold out in the fight against them. I think a sleeper pick here is the Razordon Hunting Pack, right? It's cheaper. It's got the armor-piercing missiles, so this actually will beat a unit of Black Orcs in a one-on-one. It will kill or very nearly kill a Black Orc unit with the ammunition that it has, and you can use its armor-piercing weapon damage to finish them off and maybe do some cycle charging when you have good opportunities. I think the Pterodon Riders with Fire Leech Bolas are an okay choice. They're, of course, much cheaper, right? But they just don't have the damage and the They don't have the ammo and the damage that you need in order to get the kill. So while you can field more of these and they're going to be more cost efficient, if you want to use these, you're going to need to pair it with something like a Stegodon and have them work cooperatively. I think the Quaddle is an okay choice. I wouldn't bring a lot of these, just one or two, because you can get this Chain Lightning, right? This is going to be really effective if used properly, but it can easily miss. These are also much more expensive. This is 50% more expensive than Black Orcs, and it's going to do okay in 1v1 combat with them. Like, it'll do okay in melee. It won't do great. The last pick I'm actually going to highlight here is the Temple Guards, right? Now, this might seem surprising to some of you, and of course, if you're playing on Legendary or, well, very hard battle difficulty, you're scoffing at this choice. But on normal battle difficulty, right, These have like 12 melee defense higher than Black Orcs and only a few melee attack less. So they'll actually hold out for a very long time. They've got a similar amount of upkeep. This isn't the option that you pick to beat them, but you combine Temple Guards with Stegodon, or you combine Temple Guards with Ancient Stegodon, Engine of the Gods, and use Burning Alignment, right? You use Temple Guards to hold thing in place for a nice wind spell, right? Or some other forms of magic, right? That's what they're there for. It's like a support unit. The other upside here, and this is why I didn't touch on the cavalry too much, is Temple Guards will also be a decent counter to their cavalry and their large units. So while this isn't really going to beat Black Orcs, it beats the other two problems that are present in the army. So I think it's worth bringing some, especially because you'll be on the Saurus track playing as Krok Gar already. I think the Stegodon is another obvious choice because, again, this can also deal with the cavalry, right? This is going to do great damage to the boar boys as they're moving onto your flanks. So you can use this to deal with the cavalry and the infantry, right? So it's kind of universal picks. The biggest weakness of a Razordon hunting pack is going to be the enemy cavalry. It's going to be hard for you to beat them with this, or to avoid these getting caught in combat and taking some pretty serious damage. But this is the unit that counters the Black Orc specifically. The Stegodon is probably the one-size-fits-all generalized solution. It's kind of the same thing for the Temple Guard, right? But you definitely need to bring some Carnosaurs to deal with the large units. Of course, the Carnosaur and the Troglodyte can also deal with the cavalry, but again, these are expensive, so you probably want a blend of some of these expensive options with maybe some of these less expensive options here. So that's what I think can be used against the Greenskins in terms of military compositions. So that's the kind of late game composition you should be thinking about, and you need to be thinking about it sooner rather than later, because otherwise the Black Orcs are going to show up with a WOG and they're just going to roll right over you. So that is a lot to talk about, but again, I really wanted to discuss the options. I struggled to find the right route to make it through this campaign, and really as the Lizardmen, a big part of your success is determined by making correct compositions to counter the enemy you're facing. So that was a lot to talk about, but that is all that I wanted to talk about for the buildings and military composition section of this guide. That means we're finally going to talk about the campaign itself, so let's move forward and talk about the short-term goals. Here we are, back at the start of the campaign. Now, before we get into the step-by-steps, there's of course things I want to discuss, and again, I've said this is a bit more complicated of a campaign, so strap in and get ready for some discussion, right? We got a lot of things to talk about in short-term goals and long-term strategy, but we're going to stay focused here for now. First, I want to give a reminder. The Lizardmen are more of a looting and sacking faction in the early game, right? The strength of their economy does not come from their settlements, at least not until much later on when you're well established, right? When you've cut out the growth buildings and you have a geomantic pylon set up in several provinces so that your geomantic web is at a high level, so that you get a slightly better bonus from your commandment on the province, and you can have the income building coupled with, well, we can't show it here, but that other building in your minor settlement, which would allow you to get like 10% upkeep throughout the settlement, plus you get it from the Shrine of the Old Ones, plus you get it from the Geomantic Pylon, right? So you need to have a lot of different elements compounding upon one another before their economy really becomes stable, solid, and viable. That means in the early game, it's better to advance slow and do more sacking of settlements in order to fund in order to provide the money you're missing to get the upgrades that you need in the here and now for the settlements you already have, right? Next, I talked about this during the military composition section, but you should decide early on whether you are going to get cavalry for fighting the Skaven and then swap them out later, or if you're just going to go straight into the Pterodon Riders and use some of these flying units both in the early game and through the mid game, right? Just make that decision early on. Generally, you're going to want a blend of Skinks and Saurus until you can add either of those units in. I want to also touch on the victory conditions for this campaign. Most notably, that you have to destroy the following factions, and this includes all the Tomb Kings. I say notably because, depending on how the early game goes, the Court of Liberus is going to want to be your friend. They might not, but it's possible, and depending on how the mid to late game goes, it's very likely that Khemri is going to want to be your friend. Please, 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 please do not make defensive alliances with these people. If you need to make a temporary trade agreement and non-aggression pact, be my guest. In fact, I'm going to do that with Khemri in the course of this campaign. But you just want to keep this in mind, because the people who are a legitimate threat to your success and victory in this campaign in terms of military conquest and expansion are not the same people that you actually need to destroy in order to win the campaign, right? And in fact, just to prove this, right, I don't need to conquer a single territory in the Badlands, right? I don't need to go up into the mountains. All of this territory that we need for our victory conditions is all of this desert to the west. We're, in terms of actual victory conditions, we're not at all concerned with what happens here to the north. Now, if you want to finish your campaign without getting horribly massacred by the Greenskins, you should have some concern for what happens in the north. But again, I just wanted to review this. That's why I think this is an important element to make yourself aware of early on before we start the campaign. Lastly, this campaign is hard. You're in very, very mountainous territory, and you don't have the underway, right? You're going to have to fight the Greenskins when they're approaching their peak strength, and you're just barely breaking out of your starting territory, and you're kind of locked in a corner, right? It's a surprisingly challenging campaign in the current state of the game, and it's really true for any of the factions who start here without the underway, that being the Court of Liberos and Imric in the Plane of Bones, right? Very difficult. Well, also the Dark Elves. I should give them a mention as well. I just don't play them as much. But yeah, it's anybody who doesn't have the underway really, really struggles in this terrain, okay? So don't feel bad if you have a few campaigns go awry, or you don't feel like you're making as steady of progress in the early, well, especially in the mid game, that you would be, in any other campaign, okay? So, as for the actual campaign, the first thing we need to do, of course, is conquer our starting province, right? From there, we're going to want 3 or 4 more, right? The short-term goals that I'd like to establish are essentially to cripple the Skaven and to hopefully kill the Tomb Kings. The goal should be to kill the Tomb Kings. Bare minimum, we want to control both of these provinces, right? Because we want, I can't see it now, but there's a 9-slot settlement here in Lamia, right? This is a 9-slot capital as opposed to our 7-slot capital here. That's valuable and we want it. And we want to make sure that we get to a point where we've crippled the Skaven, so that even if they've, taken some of this territory to the north, or maybe they've gone north and screwed around in Nagashazar, like, at the very least, we know that they're not going to be a serious threat because we've taken away their capital and prevented their access to higher tier units, right? We also have Teotika as an ally here. Some people might recommend breaking the treaty with them and killing them early on. Personally, I think it's not too difficult to just navigate them into a position where they get attacked by somebody and you can confederate them. It's a bit of a dice roll. I think that's up to you. I would say whatever your preference is. If you're hoping that they'll help you out a little bit, they probably will. They might not. If you'd rather just wipe them out, go for it. But those are the kind of things to keep in mind here in the early game, right? There really aren't that many other options here for the early game short-term goals. You want to wipe out the Skaven because they're going to become a serious threat in a short amount of time. Taking Lamia isn't as critical, but it is nice to have that 9-slot capital settlement, and you do need, again, remember, to kill the Court of Liberos eventually. So you want to do it sooner rather than later, instead of letting them run off and go do something stupid, right? So if we're looking at the campaign specifically, right, let's step through the process here. Turn 1, we start at war with the Skaven in this province. On the first turn, really the tips that I'd give, you attack this army, they're going to back off, and instead of chasing them into the forest and using up all your movement, I actually think you should do is stay here and recruit some more units, right? You send this hero to the north then, and this way you can isolate them and follow their army and trap them regardless of what happens, right? I want to make sure that I'm building up my army and not trying to chase down like this. Like, what is this? I don't need to be chasing that down. I need to be building up my strength for whatever they're building up in this settlement. They're either going to underway jump to the north and try to retreat, or they're going to go east into this settlement. You follow this army, right? You walk and recruit along the way, and you follow this army, whether it goes east or north. That's my advice for this very first turn, right? Once you have control of the province, you kind of want to focus on growth as much as possible, with income to follow. You might want to lean a little bit more heavily on income than I did here. perhaps putting one in the Serpent Coast instead. But you need to make sure that not only are you building enough economy for the early game, but you're also preparing yourself for the mid and late game, right? Here's where you also probably want to start scouting ahead with some hero units, right? Figure out what's going on in the northwest. If I pull this screen up, you can see I have no idea yet. I really need to find that out, right? I've had two fairly distinct campaigns occur, and I'm following a preferred route here, but I'll compare it to the other campaign later on. Basically, we're looking for the status of both the Skaven and the Tomb Kings. Are these settlements ruins, or are they Skaven lying in wait? Are the Skaven busy at war with someone else? Or are they looking for their next target? We want to figure these things out before making our next move, but ultimately we want to put as much pressure on the Skaven as we can as soon as possible. Now, if we're lucky, it's possible that the Skaven will end up at war with many people besides ourselves, right? This is what we want, especially the war with the Tomb Kings, okay? So at this point, you're just looking for a good entry point, a moment to take advantage of a misstep by Skaven while they're trying to attack a third party. And so you can see here, we pretty much have a perfect example of that. They've got this army in the Golden Tower. It's poised to take Teotihuacan. We have knowledge on both of these settlements, and there's no army here. So I know that if I can go here, wipe them out and decrease their strength, make a move back on another settlement, because I'm not at war with them yet. And so we can give ourselves the advantage here, right? You want to get a big kill on a crucial army, then try to push just directly towards their capital from there. If you're really lucky and you've decided to be friends with the Teotihuacan, you might get lucky and have them actually help just ever so slightly, and that's all you really need. The main reason we want to pressure the Skaven during this time is because it'll force them to give up on something, right? Either they successfully defend against you and put their forces here, or they have to put their army in another settlement in order to defend it against a different enemy, right? If you play it well, they're not going to successfully defend against you either. And you can see here, they've all but collapsed at this point in time, right? Generally speaking, the idea is that they won't commit all their forces to you because they'll leave something behind to defend their other settlements, but then that means they won't have enough forces on either side to win successfully, right? The last thing is, reminder, don't become friends with the don't become allies with the Tomb Kings. You can see it wouldn't be difficult for me to make agreements with them, but remember, we want to kill them, right? We're helping them now and we're doing well, but in the end, we do not want to be their friend, right? The other thing is, if you don't become friends with them, they're probably going to backstab you here anyway once you get large enough, so just keep that in mind, right? While it might seem tempting to become friends with them and to get that trade agreement, the reality is you want to take their territory for yourself and get income directly from it. The other thing that I actually haven't touched on yet is that you'll be very short on trade partners this campaign. So while you're going to have the availability of some different trade resources, you actually don't really want to produce these, and you want to just focus on producing direct income and not worrying about developing trade partners, especially early on. If everything's going well, we should be able to complete one of our objectives around this time, and in this case, it's crippling the Skaven, right? Taking their capital means eliminating their means of producing better units, as well as their ability to afford as large of a military. You don't have to finish them off here necessarily, and it's actually likely that once you reach this point, the Tomb Kings will end up fighting you as well, since you've overtaken them and the Skaven is the relevant power in the area. Sounds weird, but yeah, at least in my experience, the Tomb Kings will fight you when you're too big and too close, even with the great power bonus that you would get. Just try to stabilize the Skaven province slightly before you turn back to face the Tomb Kings. So here, you can see I got pretty lucky. Having Teotihuacan take the east side of this central province, that, like I said, they help you out ever so slightly, and that's all you really need. It seems like a small thing, but trying to hold your east while pushing in on the west means that you probably need a second army. Well, if Teotihuacan is that second army, then you don't have to worry about it. Instead, I was able to crush the Tomb Kings with relative ease and still afford a secondary army in order to hold the terrain over to the west. It also meant that eventually the Teotihuacan got sucked into my war with the Tomb Kings, and all it takes is for them to lose one big fight, or not even lose it, but just take damage, and you can confederate them quite easily, right? It's also really nice to have the AI level up a settlement for you instead of having to do it yourself. Easily, the worst outcome of all these events is that the Tomb Kings left and somehow took this territory to the north at some point. Like I said, you want to try and kill them off as soon as possible. You don't want this to happen because in order to win this campaign, I need to go in there and finish them off. It's annoying, right? But at this point, I would evaluate this as having achieved our short-term goals. We have control over all the provinces that I laid out initially. We've even confederated Teotica. We've crippled the Skaven. And while we haven't killed off the Tomb Kings, we did take their starting province, right? We'll be able to return to fight them later, but for now we can take peace with them. It should be very easy to kill off the Skaven here and then settle in for a short while to make sure we're ready for the next phase of the campaigns. Then we have some bigger decisions to make as to what to do next. Now, real quick before we look at the long-term strategy, I want to just briefly switch campaigns here and look at another campaign I did that played out a little differently. Now, the reason I want to show everyone this is because, like I said, there's not a lot of variables in this campaign, but the degree to which they can differ is quite high. The way that even your early game plays out can be pretty different. So we're on the same campaign right now. We're going back to turn 41, so you can get an idea of where we're at. I've just taken the Skaven capital. They've got an army here that they're going to waste against Teotica. I'm going to be able to come back and take this, right? Like, this is where we're at on turn 41. We're in a solid position, and we've just taken the Skaven capital, severely weakening them, right? This is on my favorable campaign. Now let's go look at the other campaign and see where we're at on turn 41. So here's the other campaign that I have on turn 41. Now, I'm still able to get to a point similar to the other campaign, similar size, similar strength, but certainly not at the same time, right? Again, we're on turn 41, and I'm trapped in my starting province. And the key reason for that is this right here, right? I'm talking about finding an opportunity to attack them when they're distracted. Well, guess what? When they're defensive allies with somebody who's right here next to us, right? Instead of going to war with the Tomb Kings, they defensive allied them, which means that I kind of got stuck in my starting province, essentially waiting them out, right? Like you have to wait until they've sent enough armies at you and died enough times that you can finally counterattack while they're still rebuilding their armies. And so it turns for a much more defensive campaign, right? So we're going to do one more quick comparison here. We're going to go back to the original campaign real quick. So here, the campaign that I've been walking through, turn 55, right? We have control of all 5 of these provinces. Our short-term goals are secured successfully, right? Keep that in mind. We're going to go back and look at what it took on that other campaign. So here we are. Map looks somewhat similar to the other campaign. I would say this is the same amount of short-term goals achieved, right? But we're on turn 75, right? Now, we at least don't see the greenskin. Maybe they're not doing as well. We didn't lose this province to the Tomb Kings, so we don't have to worry about that. But we're still 20 turns deeper into this campaign. Now, of course, that meant that we had more time to build up and stabilize our home province. And that's the key difference here in the variance in early gameplay, right? The Tomb Kings might ally with the Skaven instead of fighting them. And that's going to slow you down significantly. It put us on defense very early on. It meant we needed to play differently. It also meant that our economy and army is a bit more prepared when we do finally make our way out. But overall, it puts us further behind in the campaign, right? If possible, we want this waiting period to happen after we take all this territory, not before we take it, right? So this is just something I consider a possibility, and I want people to be aware of. I know that it's possible to exert more dominance in the early game, but just know that even though, like I said, there's not as many variables in this campaign, the degree to which they may differ is very high, right? The early game can be a breeze fighting against disorganized enemies, or it can be a cruel and unfair battle against combined forces. The greenskins can be a massive threat, or they can have a run of bad luck, and you might even be able to avoid them completely. But since we're starting to get into these larger concepts of the campaign, let's shift and talk about the long-term strategy. Alright, so we're back on track. We've got our short-term goals completed. Now, we're going to talk about the long-term strategy. As per usual, I'm going to jump back into the victory conditions real quick and just give us a refresher. We looked at them before, but I like to talk about them at this point in these guides, right? So remember, what we need to do here is conquer the desert lands to the west. We don't really need to conquer the mountain territory to the north, right? And we need to make sure that we eliminate the Skaven, they're still in here, the the Court of Liberos, who snuck up to here, and then, of course, the other Tomb King factions, right? So regardless of what else we have to focus on to succeed and survive, those are the things we need to do in order to actually win the campaign. Now, I think that temporary alliances with some of the Tomb Kings are fine. Just remember that you need to make sure that they're temporary, right? Now, in a typical campaign, we would take the time at this point to evaluate the outcome of other nearby wars and then react accordingly. However, in this campaign, I believe it's all but assured that we know what the outcome will be. The only question is how severe it will be. The Greenskins are going to be Strength Rank 1. They're going to hold a sizable amount of territory, and all it's going to take is for them to have one good fight or one good setup, and they're going to confederate another Greenskin faction and take a lot of territory for themselves, right? They're already Strength Rank 1, and I can tell you later in this campaign, they confederate. This is like Scabby Eye or whatever. He ends up beating the Bloody Hands, and then Grimgor beats him and gets the whole deal. So the Greenskins will be a major threat to everybody. Now, to touch on actual campaign strategies when dealing with the Greenskins, I want to say there's 4 ways to go about it. One is all-out attack on them, win at any cost, eliminate them at any cost, right? One is defensive or avoidance playstyle, right? You don't technically need to take their territory, so you move west and just try to avoid or ignore them. Obviously, you run the risk of either giving them territory they wanted and weakening their other opponents, or just getting attacked in the back by them and not being able to hold out. There's the hybrid option, where you attack them, but still maintain a defensive posture. So instead of really trying to take away territory and eliminate them, you're trying to weaken them for the other forces. And then a fourth kind of sneaky option is to take the Dragon Isles, right? Take this territory to the east and establish a solid flank, which gives you really good inroads and easy access to some of their most valuable territory. Now, this is probably only going to be possible if you're relatively experienced but playing on a lower difficulty, or you're very experienced, having a very successful campaign, even on higher difficulties, and you really know how to like min-max, right? Like this is being able to take this territory, right? The Dragon Isles, high value province, lots of income, good suitability for you, and this allows you to have this direct inroad from here right to the Black Crag, right? And so being able to kind of come straight in like that and hit them where it hurts, that's beautiful, as opposed to trying to navigate this horrendous mountain terrain or running yourself ragged through attrition causing territory, right? So those are the different ways I think we can deal with the Greenskins. In my campaign, I kind of go the hybrid route. I think it depends on how big they are, and again, how experienced you are. I really love the idea of going off on this flank, but again, it's going to be hard to do that without spreading yourself too thin, so you really have to be set up correctly for it. I love the best way to deal with stronger enemies in this game in general is to get them to just waste all their armies on you, and once they finally weakened themselves, dying to unfavorable matchups, then you go and take some of their territory and expand a little bit, gives the dwarves a room to breathe and take them out as well. But if from that other campaign, even on turn 75, the Greenskins themselves weren't here, like the Black Crag Greenskins, right? So it could be possible for me to just ignore them and focus on pushing west and taking this territory without really creating additional flanks for the Greenskins to hit. So those are all the ways that I think we can approach the campaign map strategically when it comes to dealing with the Greenskins. So it's just a long and roundabout way of saying that you should prefer defensive play until your economy is secure, but you shouldn't avoid attacking if you have a solid opportunity to do so. If you're incredibly lucky or you have a different campaign, the Greenskins might be weak, or you've become strong enough fast enough to overtake them. Like I said, it's basically just a personal call if you want to just try to push west, and it's just a judgment call. It's a judgment call, and it's a tough one to make, and make yourself a backup save if you're not playing on Legendary so you can return to a point like this in your campaign once you see how things play out, right? At this point in my campaign, I've made the decision to make an initial attack on the Greenskins, right? I don't intend to wipe them out entirely and chase them to the ends of the earth, just to assist the others who are also fighting them. I still need to finish off the Tomb Kings as well, so things will get a little awkward here. We're also still in the process of building up settlements in our economy. You can see we're in a little bit better shape than we were not too long ago. We need to recruit and build some different units, and honestly, you can see even this composition isn't ready for what we're going to be facing when we come to fight the Greenskins, right? I just didn't want to let an opportunity go to waste. I know that they're already at war with a couple other factions, and I can't let them have that war go on unopposed. Takes a little bit, and of course we have to repel several attacks, but we finally make some headway. Now, of course, this is a pretty common strategy when attacking a stronger enemy. It's actually how I handled the Skaven in the alternate campaign I showed. Like I said, you basically let the enemy run themselves ragged attacking you. You let them continue to attack like a choke point or undefended vulnerable point. You kill enough of their armies to reduce their momentum and force them to spend some time building up. Of course, it doesn't look like his momentum's been that reduced. Helps that he, acquired all this territory. But you can see the amount of forces at war with him have increased, and basically it just allows me to slowly but surely make some headway against him, right? It's all about having good timing and fair knowledge of their forces' total strength as well as their current location and objective. Once we get the momentum in our favor, we can finally make some decent progress. I had hoped to kind of take this horrible province here to the west and try to use this as a stopping point, right? If I could use this as a cutoff point between the Greenskins' territory to the west and myself, it'd be a lot easier to defend. Didn't really work out that way. They're able to build up too quickly before I can navigate from one city to the next and take it. But you can see I took this province for myself, right? We're slowly working our way east to do this miserable work of eliminating the Court of Libaris here. But essentially, we're also working towards the flank of the Greenskins and kind of provides this army as a lightning rod. We can then, take some fights with them, force them to leave some of their military attention on the east, and even potentially sack some of these cities to get a little bit of monetary value of them, right? So we've expanded a little bit. We have 20 settlements compared to the Greenskins' 16. They're stronger than us, but like I talked about before, it's about stabilizing, right? I can defend this stuff successfully and continue growing my economy until I reach the point where I can make another army and push out even further. We also have a little temporary alliance with the Tomb Kings that we're going to break before too long so we can get back to fighting them. Moving a bit further now, we see that the situation isn't all that different for me, right? I haven't really taken that much territory or expanded in any way. But our economy is a little bit more stable, and the key difference is that the Greenskins are not in as good of a position as they used to be before, right? So this is a significant shift in how the course of the game is going, right? Even though I've certainly become stronger and more stable, I haven't grown much, but the person who was the main threat to us in this campaign is now approaching the brink of destruction. Certainly they're no longer the threat to our successful campaign that they were previously, right? Our economy is strong. We have very good control over our territory. We have armies which can start to push forward again instead of just holding ground. And we've stabilized our settlements. We could probably afford a third army. And at this point, we're all set to renew our efforts to actually pursue the victory conditions. You can see I even broke agreements with the Tomb Kings. So yeah, with that being said, if you can make it this far, it should set you up for success, right? I know that this is a long one, but this is truly a challenging campaign. I think there's a lot of things to talk about. It's not as straightforward, and there's a lot of critical decisions that have to be made, and they're based on, very specific cases that can change greatly from game to game, right? A big part of playing Lizardmen is being very patient and taking efficient trades. It's going to take quite some time to do this against the Greenskins, but if you stop their momentum and they can't produce wogs anymore, then eventually they will fail. Of course, I talked at length about military compositions, in part because of how much I struggled because of failure to update my own compositions in this campaign myself. So please don't do what I did. Don't leave your army like this into turn 100. Please update it and use some better units. The Ripperdactyl Rider's not really worth it. The Chameleon Skinks, I mean, they're cheap, but man, I just needed some Stegodons, right? I wouldn't really expect anyone still remaining in the west at this point to put up much of a fight either, right? These are all still scattered. Nobody's consolidated power here. So, right, if you can get this far, you've won the campaign by default, just in virtue of having survived, right? You can see that the big takeaways are to try to use other players to your advantage against the enemies, particularly the dwarves, and to be more patient and focus on building up your settlements and economy and playing more defensively. Research really helps the Lizardmen as well. Some of their research is what allows them to become very powerful. They're one of the strongest late game races out there once everything's been set up correctly. With that being said, I feel that we've reached the end of the guide. I hope you've learned some useful things here. Like I said, I know we talked about a lot this time around, but this is a much more challenging campaign than I initially anticipated. However, I still think there's a few ways to approach it successfully. In the end, I wish you luck on your efforts as well. If you did enjoy the video, please remember to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it does help the channel a lot. Having said that, thanks for watching, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.